Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you're joining us in the world today. You're very welcome to the first Schools Think Next online conversation, which is being hosted by the British Council Northern Ireland, and I'm delighted to be hosting this afternoon. My name is Conor Houston. I'm a lawyer by trade, and I currently have my own consulting business working with a range of leaders in government, the third sector and in the private sector. I also hold a number of board positions, including being a governor and trustee of the Irish Times media organisation. And I suppose most relevant to today's conversation, I have the privilege of being a governor of a school, a special school in Northern Ireland, Fleming Fulton School in Belfast. We're coming live from my study in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I know that we have people from right across the world taking part today. So Schools Think Next is a series of online conversations bringing local and international perspectives to vital conversations about learning from the experience of COVID-19, as well as the possibilities for longest term system change. You may have seen on the website which was promoting this event was a beautiful quote by a poet and theologian called Padraig Ó Tuama, who happens to be a very good friend of mine, and I think he captured it perfectly when he said, "Lockdown is a revelation, not because it reveals new things, but because it lifts the curtain on the way things are already done. Our choice now will be how to live, how to speak up, how to act, and how to vote in light of all that lockdown reveals." And I think it's a beautiful way of framing the conversation and what it is that this series is trying to achieve. I've had the privilege of being engaged and working with the British Councils really most of my adult life, and I was reflecting today that thanks to the British Council I've been very lucky to get to a lot of different parts of the world to engage in education and learning, including being a fellow of the Hammamet conference in Tunisia, in supporting, they supported me to speak at One Young World in Bogota, Colombia a number of years ago, and also being involved with them as part of delivering an international conference in Belfast to mark the 20th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement called Peace and Beyond. So it's really special for me personally to be here with the British Council today, and their soft power, the work they do to promote education, to bring people together, to have these kind of conversations is something that's extremely valuable, and even more so in the world that we are now inhabiting. So I'm delighted to welcome people today from right across the globe. I think we have 33 countries represented on this call, which is fantastic, from Hong Kong, Nigeria, Yemen, Colombia, Mexico. So we're really delighted to welcome all that have taken the time to join us. The impact of COVID-19 has given all of us an unprecedented opportunity to see the world in a new way, and I suppose to craft an education system that better meets the needs of our young people. Now, here in Northern Ireland, before the lockdown in March, before this pandemic took hold, the school sector here was already preparing for change. In January, our politicians reached a political agreement to restore our local government, our devolved government, in a document called New Decade, New Approach. And in that deal, they agreed to an independent review of our education system. So I suppose what we can say in Northern Ireland is that change is very much inevitable, but the outcome is not. And I think that that is why the timing of this conversation is so important. So the Schools Think Next series engages with a wide range of local and international educational thinkers, researchers, practitioners, and others to explore possible answers to two key questions. The first is, what should be left in the past? What should we leave behind? Second is, what should be embraced for the future? Or very often, as I ask my clients that I work with when we're embarking on a big ambitious strategy, what does success look like? If we get this right, what will it look like? And I'm looking forward with our distinguished panelists to exploring those two questions this afternoon. We've had already a fantastic response to our 8 short videos of educational thinkers, including most recently Professor John Hattie, Dr. Anne Looney and Andreas Schmelkes. The wider international online engagement builds on local thinking and provides a platform for sharing ideas and experience across different countries, which, as I say, I think is a very vital role the British Council plays. In the new year, there will be more of these videos to come. Now, today you can join, and we really encourage you to join the conversation by commenting or asking questions or posting on social media. So one of the ideas that the British Council are encouraging us all to do is we're talking about vision for the future of education and what success will look like. Why don't you post your own short video online on Twitter, setting out what your vision or what your idea is? But make sure if you're posting anything that you use the hashtag #SchoolsThinkNext. So hashtag #SchoolsThinkNext, and also to follow the British Council NI on Twitter as well. So today's event is the first of 3 online conversations, and this one will focus on intercultural learning. And each event will include teachers from Northern Ireland and education experts from around the world, and today is no exception to that. Now, just before I introduce our panelists and we can hear from them in what I know will be a really stimulating and interesting conversation, I just have a few quick housekeeping matters to advise you. Firstly, today's event will be recorded and a video will be available in the coming days on the British Council Northern Ireland website, and I think details are on your screen at the moment. Again, just to remind you on social media to use the hashtag #SchoolsThinkNext, and in terms of accessibility, and subtitles, there are closed caption subtitles available, so you can read what the speakers are saying, and they're available in English, Arabic, French, Spanish and Portuguese. And there's a small button with CC, which you should be able to see on the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you can choose your language. And I've been asked in advance, just to apologise, it's computer generated, so it may not be completely accurate, and particularly with Northern Ireland accents, we apologise for any translation mistakes. So we'll start in literally a moment by asking our panelists some questions to introduce the topic before moving on to an open conversation focusing on what schools and our school system should leave in the past and what they should embrace for the future to deliver intercultural education more effectively. There will be a question and answer session at the end of today's conversation, and that will be an opportunity for you to ask questions and make comments on the topic of intercultural learning. And I know a number of people have already submitted at registration some really excellent questions. So if you do have an additional question or comment, please type it into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. And if it's for a specific panelist, remember just to add their name. So that really, I suppose, is all the housekeeping matters. And without further ado, I'd like to now introduce our really exceptional panel who are joining us from right across the world. And I want to thank them before we start for taking the time to be with us today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So in no particular order, I'll introduce firstly Sharon Lamont, who is the principal of Millburn Primary School in Coleraine, which is up on the beautiful north coast of Northern Ireland. She has had considerable experience of working with her team of teachers to build and sustain international experiences for her pupils. We're also joined today by Professor Janice Carruthers, a Professor of French Linguistics at Queen's University, Belfast, and she is an advocate for the value of languages in society. She has represented the Arts and Humanities Research Council on the authorship team for Towards a National Languages Strategy for the UK Education and Skills. We also have today then Richard Simcott, who is the founder of the Polyglot Conference and Languages Director at the Social Element. Richard is a British hyper-polyglot who has studied incredibly over 50 languages, that's 50 languages. He has had many years of consulting experience using languages in the public and private sectors, offering his expertise on multilingual and multinational projects. He organises the Polyglot Conference annually, and he is also raising his daughter to speak 5 languages, which I think is really wonderful. I look forward to hearing about that in a moment. If you want to follow Richard's work, he keeps a blog and social channels under the banner of Speaking Fluently. And finally, but by no means least, we have Sylvia Schmelkes, the academic provost of Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. She is a sociologist with wide experience in educational research and leadership in Mexico and internationally. And she has written extensively on quality and values in education and intercultural education. So I'm sure you'll agree, we could probably, as I said before we come on the call, we could probably spend an hour speaking to each of them, but we're going to, in the course of the next hour, engage, I hope, in a really stimulating conversation. So just to start our conversation with our panel this afternoon, perhaps I could turn first to you, Sylvia, and ask, I suppose, to set the scene of this conversation, what is intercultural learning and why is it important?
Yes, well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you very much to the British Council for inviting me to be here this morning. And in answer to your question, I would say that, well, we live in a globalized world. People migrate now more than ever before due to many reasons. Poverty is one of them, but of course, conflicts, education is an important reason for migrating, the desire for a better life. Each of our nations, of our regions, which were already diverse to start with, are more and more diverse due to this. Cultural diversity can strengthen us and enrich us all, but it can also lead to the exacerbation of stereotyping, stigmas, discrimination, even racism. And these attitudes and conducts often lead to conflict and often to violent conflict. Intercultural education is what helps us discover the wealth of diversity. Well administered, it develops respect for the different others. It offers opportunities to discover that due to the fact that the other person is different, there is much to learn from him or her. Intercultural education is anti-racist education, but it is also a tool for learning to solve conflicts in non-violent ways and for learning to live together in harmony. This is necessary for the governance of nations, hence the importance of intercultural education.
Thank you, Sylvia, for that really wonderful answer. And coming from Northern Ireland, which is has been a divided society, I think you speak a truth there in the importance of understanding understanding the other. So thank you for that, and setting, I think, really well the scene and the context of this conversation. Sharon, if we could maybe come to you up on the lovely North Coast, how do we teach intercultural learning now in schools, and do we do it well?
Well, I can just about get words out having listened to Sylvia there, because that just resonated completely with how Millburn Primary School hopes to run its ethos and teach its children to learn about being intercultural. How do we do it? Well, I think at the moment it's a piecemeal, but it deserves so much more. It sits perfectly, language and culture sit perfectly within the personal development mutual understanding curriculum, and really, to make it meaningful to the child, it has to be embedded within the daily curriculum. It can't be an add-on with regards extracurricular activities where children are only touching upon it once a week and they don't have the opportunity for consolidation. It has to be linked to the children's understanding of their already connected learning. And in primary school, right through to secondary schools, post-primary sector, that's about looking at the topics that right the way across curriculum, there is a place to be intercultural. I think it deserves the platform, which it hasn't been given. As Sylvia said, we very much are a global society now for numerous reasons. And I see that as a very strong positive. Because, as you also said, we have in Northern Ireland got caught up in communities as opposed to moving our children towards understanding a whole community. And I think that's going to be pivotal in how we make a difference for our young children to become sustainable, successful citizens of future generations.
Thank you very much. I think that global perspective of our young people is so important and increasing. And I think actually really interestingly, when you talk to a lot of young people, the issue of climate change is something, you know, I meet with a lot of teenagers, and that seems to be something they understand, that the only way to resolve that is to work globally, internationally. And it's exciting to see a generation coming through who understand that it's not just about the community they come, but that wider sense. So I completely agree. Janice, over in my lovely alma mater, Queen's University, there's research to say that language learning has been declining, you know, and I suppose, have you any observation on why that's happening, and how important are international experiences in terms of intercultural learning?
So thanks very much, Conor. Yes, there is lots of evidence now. We have all the statistics around this, that language learning in the UK is certainly in decline, and it's at every level. It's at GCSE. So for those of you who are outside the UK, sort of the testing system we have around the age of 16. It's at advanced level in terms of pupils leaving school, and it's also at university level. There is no one single reason for this. There are several, and I'm just going to mention, I think, what are emerging as probably the three most important. One is a wide societal assumption that English is enough, that if you speak English, that's enough. Only 5% of the world speak English as a first language. And although it is, of course, a second language right across the world, and there's no denying that, those who learn English as a second language, of course, have at least two languages, at least in their competence. So English on its own, in terms of our international relations, business, all sorts of dimensions of life, isn't enough. So that's one. A second is that there are quite substantial curriculum and assessment issues around how we do languages. And to put it very simply, when you ask young people why they're opting out of languages, they will tell you that they are difficult and that they are graded severely. And some of the recommendations that we've put in place towards a national languages strategy, the document you mentioned at the beginning, are pushing towards solving some of these problems. And the last one I would mention, I think also for young people, we do need to improve the quality of our careers advice on what you can do with languages. And again, one of our proposals from the National Languages Strategy is to open up a Languages UK portal, which would have lots of different things on it, but one of them would be access to more information about the doors that languages can open for you.
Thank you, Janice. And I think that very nicely brings us on to Richard, who, of course, can speak multiple languages. So someone who can tell us a lot about what we can do with the ability to speak multiple and embracing the multitude of languages. So Richard, I suppose if I could ask you, what is the role of languages in intercultural learning, and what role does language learning play in widening horizons, especially for young people?
I think that technology is developing at a rate that the older generations, for ourselves, we find difficult to keep up with. And I think that the relevance for younger people is something that we need to actually elicit from younger people themselves. Generation Z is a very different generation to the other generations that are on the planet at the moment. They are digital natives. So they embrace the world society in a very different way to anyone that's come before them. And so I think that we need to speak to their world. And in order to do that, it means that we need to listen to what interests them, what they find as relevant, and so that they can come up with their own solutions with us to find strategies to A, learn, and B, see the relevance in what they're doing. And I think that, all the points raised are extremely valid. We definitely do need to study languages, not just for the ability to communicate with other people, because clearly people do go to Spain on holiday or to different places on holiday, and the first language they use, irrespective of where they've come from in Europe, they will often use English as a lingua franca. And so we need to have a nod to that, the fact that happens, but also show that we speak a language that is actually mixed with English and French primarily, with a Germanic base and a strong French lexicon. So we have over 60% of our words are from French, and there are clear advantages when you're delving into literature, when you're trying to understand why English works the way it does, studying languages that are closely related to it. And then beyond that, where we've taken words. As a language, we are quite unique in that we don't have this body that dictates what we use when we use it and what appears on TV and what doesn't. We as a language community accept pretty much everything. But what that means is we also bring the treasures and richness of the world's languages into our own. And I think embracing that and showing where they come from and honouring that those jewels within our own linguistic culture, I think is super important. And I think they're probably the keys to really open things up for the next generation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. And so it's building on the point I think I made at the beginning around there is a generation who do see and think. So I wonder, and it's building on Janice's point, actually maybe Generation Z are the generation where we see that reversing trend towards learning other languages, and with the digitalization, I mean, I could probably go on and register now to learn a language with relative ease from this laptop. Hopefully we'll see a reverse in that trend. I suppose that they've been really helpful for setting the scene for the conversation we're having and the perspectives. And I suppose for me, the theme that's coming out overall is that this is all about broadening the minds and mindsets of our young people and giving them sort of that bigger global view. And of course, that global pandemic has given us perhaps all a reminder that we are a very interconnected world. So I suppose what I'd be interested now to sort of have a conversation around is what from all of this, what do we leave behind? What do we now accept in terms of educate that it's be best to sort of leave behind after this pandemic? And perhaps looking forward then, what will success look like? How will we define success in terms of this intercultural education and measuring? We meet again in 10 years' time and go, well, Generation Z have got it right and they're doing good in the world. How will we measure that? What will that look like? So maybe Sylvia, I'll come back to you first. Sylvia, sorry, I think you might be on mute. Sorry, Justin. Thank you.
Intercultural education goes through 3 stages, I think, and the 3 stages are very important, and that we should evaluate how we are dealing with the 3 stages. The first stage is to know about the different others. No? We need knowledge about the different others, because if we don't know them, there can be no demand for respecting them. No, so we have to know about them, but we have to know about them we don't have to learn about them. We don't have to memorize anything about them. We have to learn about them in a way that really arises our curiosity of learning more and of getting nearer to the different others. So I think we have to evaluate how much we are actually attaining that. And in the second place, the second stage is respecting. We have to respect the different others, those that we know and those that we don't know, because we are learning about those that are near us, but also those that are far away from us. No, so we have to respect. We have to learn about respecting each person and about respecting each culture. Each culture merits respect, and we have to really attain that as a consequence of intercultural education. And the third thing that we need is to appreciate diversity, to appreciate the differences. And one way to attain that is to have this experience of living this enrichment, of having the opportunity of either vicariously, virtually, or directly, having been taught by others who know different things than we do. And that leads to appreciation. And I think that is another thing that we should be evaluating. Are we actually attaining appreciation of the differences within our own culture and outside of our own culture? And so I think those 3 things should be assessed, should be evaluated. We should be aware of how much we are progressing in each of these 3 stages. And of course, these 3 stages are done spirally, in a spiral form. little by little. We don't achieve them in one school year, and we don't achieve them in one subject area. We achieve them, as Sharon was saying, we embed it in the curriculum. And so we have to spirally look for more complex situations in which interculturality is there. But I do believe that societally, the social influence, the social impact of that has to be noted in the possibility of governance and of living together harmoniously. I think that is what we should be looking for as a consequence, as the impact of intercultural education. And I think we have several historical examples of that. I know that it is possible, so this is precisely, I think, the objective of intercultural education.
Thank you, Sylvia,
Thank
for
you.
that. And I mean, maybe Sharon, if I could come to you. What do we think are the how do we do it? I suppose Sylvia has very eloquently put sort of the principles, the stages, respecting others, respecting diversity, having that appreciation. How do we practically start to go about that? How would we measure success in doing that, do you think?
Well, as a school that sits in an area of neighbourhood renewal with a lot of deprivation, Millburn actually already has embedded 4 international languages into its daily curriculum. One of those being Irish. Now, given the demographics of our school, that in Northern Irish context is quite strange. I'm very proud of it. The staff are very proud of it. I think what we also have to be very mindful of the fact that in a school even like ours, we have children coming from 32 different nationalities. And each and every one of them brings something special to our school. So I think in order to make this meaningful, children have to grow up and develop, as Sylvia said, the relationships to understand and focus on the similarities, not to get caught up on the differences. The success comes when you start to chip away at the generational issues that have arisen with maybe grandparents and children, young children. Our 4-year-olds can go home and have a conversation about their friend who comes from China, who comes from Nigeria, and that brings a community together. That brings together that understanding. So I also think that you've got a measure of success if you have whole school buy-in, a whole school buy-in as to why it is important to develop that complete ethos of respect and equality, and to move your school towards totally inclusive and an integrated environment, because that then leads, it leaks into the very fabric of your day-to-day teaching, whether it be involved in the language or the intercultural. It is actually seeped into the purpose of what you do. You need that whole school buy-in. I also think we'll have a measure of success when the Department of Education starts to revisit what is important and how it starts to, and how it looks at measuring and baselining school success, which currently is about literacy and numeracy driven. But that will never give a whole picture of a successful school. So those would be the points: work on the relationships, work on the whole school buy-in, look for the similarities, and let's get a change in policy. Let's give this very important aspect of education the platform that it well deserves.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Sharon, you brilliantly there, sort of the zoom, what I call the zoom in, zoom out, that you're already doing this and fostering that on the ground. And I think for the context of our international guests, when I was a child, there certainly wouldn't have been 32 different nationalities in my primary school. We were probably nearly predominantly all white Christian, and so there has been a change societally in Northern Ireland, particularly in the last decade, and so I think it's just worth acknowledging that. But you also, so there's the work on the ground, but there's also, I think what you're getting at, there also then has to be the policy lead, there has to be a government lead, and that big vision, ambition is very important to steering, as it were, the ship in the direction it's going. Maybe I could bring you in, Janice, then in terms of success, what it looks like, and particularly thinking of languages and the role of language in that regard.
Yes, thanks, Conor. For me, I suppose success would be that our young people see speaking more than one language as normal. And whether that is what Sharon was talking about, children in primary school, that the girl or the boy beside them in the class, you know, speaks Arabic or Punjabi or Urdu or whatever language, or Polish at home. There are actually now over 90 languages in our primary schools in Northern Ireland, which, as you say, is a huge change in the last sort of 15 to 20 years. Or whether they see it as quite normal for them to want to learn another language when they move into the secondary sector, but that it's normal. It's not this difficult, awkward subject that you're made to do to 15 and then hopefully get rid of it as soon as possible thereafter. I'd like them to love learning languages and to feel that it's normal. Of course, that would mean when it feeds through that we would get much better numbers. But I would also like to see, and this is really important, I would like to see more young people from right across the social spectrum learning languages, because at the moment there is a massive social divide. And it's not just in Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, it's very sharp between the selective and the non-selective sector at secondary level. And in other countries, for example, in England, there's a very sharp independent versus state school divide. Languages are perceived as elite, and I would very much like to see that disappear. In terms of what we need to do, I don't think that everything we've done up to now needs to be left behind. I think that the first thing we need to do is remove the barriers, and I've already mentioned those around, in particular, perceptions of difficulty in grading. We need to remove the barriers. And I think it was Richard who was talking about tuning ourselves in to what young people enjoy and embedding some of those things, including the digital, into their language learning so that they get as much enjoyment out of it as possible, because in the end of the day, for them to opt in, they've got to love the subject and enjoy it. So I'm sure there's more that we can do there to help them opt in, but we must remove the barriers first.
And Richard, maybe I can bring you in then, and then as someone, maybe you are the model of success as somebody who has clearly, I take it, a passion and love for language. If you've immersed yourself in over 50, you know, what would success look like for you in terms of this area?
I think success is always difficult to gauge completely. One of the factors that I would personally see as an indicator of success, and the way I see things moving forward, is the huge advantage of the technical age, where we now have many ways to connect with each other. Where you see these communities moving to different countries, it's very different to how it was many years ago, before the advent of the internet in its current form, in that you get people who move to different countries. They tend to move in groups, and they will connect with each other, and they will also stay connected with their home countries. Whereas before, there would be the whole Iron Curtain. People would lose their language, they'd lose their culture, they'd integrate into the new society completely. Now, that's the first thing. I think that it's an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is that linguistically you can remain in contact, and you can bring your new generation in the new country up with that language from the old country in a much more sort of sophisticated and a lot easier way than you could before, because you have access to the media, the radio, all that kind of stuff from those countries now that you didn't have in the past. Now, the issue you have in the new country, particularly when we're talking about the Isles, is that we have a dominant language, which is English. And like many countries with a very dominant language and perceived as a very elitist, useful language, we have the issue that we also tend to be elitist when we look at people from these communities. So we perceive languages like French as being sort of the top dog, I'd say, still within the Isles. And then the other languages sort of come under that language, because French is always sort of this language of cuisine and all these very fancy things. And I think that's exactly what's perceived. I remember when I lived in Chester with my daughter, people would always ask me to form a French-speaking group for the toddlers, but they'd never ask us to form a Macedonian-speaking group for the toddlers. So there's this kind of language snobbery that exists, and I think within schools and society we need to break those down, and we need to get to the crux of actually what's important about learning a language. Yes, the communication is important. Yes, it's good to understand each other, and I agree with everything that's been said so far. I also think that there's a neurolinguistic advantage that we have here as well. And I think talking to neuroscientists like a friend of mine, Dr. Thomas Back in the University of Edinburgh, who does research in this field, just really helps to resonate with what he's doing in the real world. You know, it actually knocks 4.5 years off the time you would get dementia or Alzheimer's. For your brain, the brain plasticity is simply improved by learning more languages, even later in life. It doesn't have to be from a child's age. You know, you can learn it later and get these advantages of learning languages. So there are many avenues we can explore, and I think technology, seeing how small languages survive and move on in the future is probably a good indicator of how that can be, and then taking these advantages and making sure that people understand and perceive them is also extremely important.
Thanks, Richard. I think that's a really interesting point, and I've been involved in the tech sector through some of my clients, and the use of immersive technologies and things like that are giving opportunities now for people to literally put on a headset, be in another part of the world, experience another culture, hear another language. So I completely agree with you. The opportunities that tech is going to bring is yet to be fully imagined or realized. You know, maybe just Sylvia, to come back to you. I mean, I think one of the things you talked about is that respecting of other, and you know, one of the things that I'm interested in and have done many things with the British councils over the years in this regard. I'm always trying to encourage young people. You know, it's easy to find your tribe and the people who agree with you, but the most important thing you can do as a responsible citizen is to engage with the people that you disagree with, and that can be hard. And it can be hard, particularly, and I can speak from experience in Northern Ireland, where everything is divisive. What you call a town will determine which side of the community you come from. Talking about language, and it was referenced by Sharon that her school is teaching the Irish language, that became a very political issue as to who should have the rights to speak it and whether it should be recognised, and what government should do to recognise the rights of Irish speakers here in Northern Ireland. So I suppose I'm interested in just understanding a little bit more about what happens when these cultural things become are the source of conflict, are the source of division. How can we confront those, I suppose, de-weaponize them and build that respect and appreciation that you talk about?
Yes, well, thank you very much, Conor. Yes, well, I think it's difficult, as you say, but I think school is a privileged place to be able to do it, because intercultural education is at the bottom values education. And in order to achieve value structure of one's own, you have to have the opportunity of dialoguing with others. And here I stress the word dialogue, because dialogue means listening and being able to have the other listen too. No? So you have to establish situations of dialogue within the school, and that is something that can be done in the classroom. It's very difficult to do it outside, but in the classroom you can do it. But after the dialogue, what you need is to reflect. You need a space for individual reflection that leads you to an individual decision about how to deal with a dilemma. These are dilemmas. These are social dilemmas that you have to deal with. And so you have to take into account your own perspective, but also the other perspectives that you have listened to, you know, in order to take a decision, and then go back into the dialogue. Not to return to the dialogue and to say, well, I have decided this and this is my argument for it. And again, to be open to other decisions that the others might have taken. So I do believe that what we are looking for in intercultural education in schools is this possibility of developing reflective and critical thinking. And here I really think that, well, intercultural education has three principles. The first principle is that the relationship occur on the basis of equality. on a horizontal basis, no? So this is something that we have to achieve. You can't have a superior inclination towards the other, or you can't feel inferior to the other. You have to be on a horizontal plane to be able to establish this relationship. And the next is you have to, well, they're based on respect, as I have already said, and also they are mutually enriching. And these are the three principles of intercultural education that we have to sort of achieve. We have to achieve this mutually enriching experience of being with the different others. So I do believe that the school is a place to teach about dialoguing, about listening, about making decisions, taking into account the other's point of view, and this is what is very important. And once we learn this, and we learn it across our schooling, all through our schooling, that is a habit that you achieve in your life, and you can actually deal with your social dilemmas in life, taking into account this need to put yourself in the shoes of the different other.
Wonderful. I mean, I know I have young nephews who at their primary school recently ran for election for the school council, and I was really impressed by the level of campaigning and engagement. And when I heard about the dialogue groups that they have to discuss issues with the principal, with the teachers, and with their peers, I was really excited that Sylvia, they were learning these lessons that will hold them well throughout their lives, and their willingness to engage and listen and change their minds and be persuaded. And was really quite humbling. And Sharon, I suppose that at your school, that I suppose what Sylvia said, that it is embedding these things into the day-to-day practice, encouraging dialogue. I mean, maybe I suppose two things to maybe sort of say to you, in terms of how do you foster that dialogue within the school. And I suppose, again, for an international audience listening today, we have an education system which still the majority of our children are educated in faith schools by terms of their religion, and there is a growing integrated movement to try and have all children integrated together. And of course, talking about intercultural, you talk about the 32 different nationalities in your school, and yet we have a challenge in Northern Ireland about putting 2 religions into the one school. I just wonder if the two are related in what you think, and I suppose how we have the dialogue within the school, and the issue of how we integrate and have that intercultural learning.
With regards to the dialogue, I think the dialogue comes from the ethos and the values that you hold within your school. And that's something that I hope I touched on earlier, in that if you encourage children to look at things from the other side of the table, i.e. somebody else's point of view, generally speaking, if you've got the right culture within your school, they will come up with their own solutions. It's about treating children with the respect that they deserve as well, and allowing them to have that voice. And I'm laughing about the school's council, because it wouldn't be the first time that my school's council had made me do a turnaround by listening to their point of view and getting into where they're seeing their learning as being important. And I think that sets up a very true value for education as a whole, that it's a learning partnership. It's not a dictatorship, and children are open and do have their own opinions, and those should be encouraged to be shared. With regards to the valuing of the nationalities that we have, to put us into context, we are not officially an integrated school, but we have total integration across all religions, and our school operates through the principal values of all the world religions. Now, that is sitting within the demographic of our school, its locality. We are in a predominantly loyalist state, that would be a Protestant state. So the things that we've introduced could have been highly controversial. So in order to get around that, we had to reach out into the wider community to make links with other stakeholders involved with our school, to help them understand what we were doing and why we were doing it. And the reason, again, Janice had mentioned about language is elitist. There is no doubt about it. And given the demographic of our school, with a number of children who are coming from quite deprived backgrounds. That should not mean that because of their postcode, they are deprived of every opportunity that every other child has. And once we had taken that out into our wider community, the reputation of our school grew. And in fact, we don't need an integrated badge because, as you've mentioned, Conor, Northern Ireland by its very nature has too many badges. And I think we need to be moving past that. Again, with regards to, how do we know this works? We'll know that this works when people don't feel the way in which I felt and still do feel. I am not a linguist. And that came from part and parcel of my education and my background. The way in which language was taught to me, it didn't suit. The teaching of it was not good for me, didn't work, and my background. And I am adamant that no child will ever be that comes through Millburn will ever be feeling awkward around other nationalities the way in which I did up until the very, very sort of about 10 years ago.
Sure, thank you, and I agree absolutely with your comments there, Sharon. It's obviously great leadership from your school in terms of everything that you're doing up in Coleraine. Janice, I'm going to start there's questions flooding in from both the pre-register and now online, so I'm trying to keep an eye on those as well, and I think naturally actually from the conversation this afternoon it leads us nice to ask this question, which is how it's a really great question. How can we get languages as high up the agenda as something like STEM? If you think of the work, and I, even myself as somebody not from the education, I'm very aware of the campaign around the promotion of STEM and STEM subjects and STEM careers. Is that the kind of model that we need to replicate in terms of languages? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's a good question. And it's one that has come up, in the discussion over the last few years quite a bit. I think in the languages community, we're very keen not to set ourselves up in opposition to STEM, because there's no reason why young people cannot take sciences and languages. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it is a sort of STEM versus humanities or STEM versus languages scenario that we are dealing with. But what I do think is that we continue to have to keep trying in the languages sector to get the right sorts of messages across to young people and to ensure that the teaching that goes on, picking up on what I think both Richard and Sharon were saying, that it is appealing to them and will make them themselves want to opt in. One of the things that we are trying to do as a result of the proposals for a national languages strategy is to do precisely that sort of thing around that sort of exercise around messaging through what we're calling the Languages UK portal. And we're now at the stage of putting that into action after Christmas, trying to get that set up so it would be a web resource that would have, different sections that do different things. But one of those things would be around the messaging in relation to opportunities and advantages and so forth for those who are able to speak more than one language. So in short, we need to do the sort of work that was done on STEM in terms of promoting languages, rather than, as it were, setting ourselves up in opposition to languages. And it is very frustrating. I've seen this as a parent myself, when you go along sometimes to careers events and the message is communicated clearly that STEM is very important, and you're sitting there want to jump out of your seat and say, hold on a minute, can I say something about languages? So I think, that's the job that we too in the languages community have to do.
Yeah, thank you so much. Richard, there's a question I think come in for you, and I think it's a slight rebuttal to a comment probably that I think I made when we were speaking earlier about the opportunities of the digital and virtual world. And a good question has been asked that virtual or digital learning can be a poor experience for international experience. So how do we move forward in a COVID world to ensure young people benefit from the richness of intercultural experience that is found from living or visiting another country? So I suppose perhaps the way of phrase, how do we find that balance between, yes, there's opportunities of the digital virtual world, the fact we're all on this call today, but how do we ensure that with that richness of as somebody who's lived in another country, how do we ensure that young people have that experience, and what are your thoughts on that?
So I think the first thing to say is that Generation Z is a very different generation, as I mentioned before. And I noticed this with my own daughter, who's 13, they don't notice the difference in the same way we do between real life, in-person contact, and the online world. They perceive their friendships in a very different way. They've grown up, and this has been a very natural, very normal way for them to communicate with friends around the world. So it's difficult to say how you sort of bring them back to what we're used to. And I'm not saying that it means that this is not a useful thing to do. Of course, in-person human contact is extremely important, I think, for children and for us just as individuals, as human beings. I just think that this technology is actually one thing that can help to enhance the learning process and to add to it. So I don't see this as replacing or something that sort of just changes everything. It does to a degree because it's the reality for this generation, but it doesn't mean that it takes the place of human contact. What it can do is it can help us to value smaller languages that were never typically seen as languages you could take through your education and add to your CV. So, for example, just with this, many courses at City Lit have opened up in languages like Cornish, Gaelic, and these are languages that otherwise, if you were abroad or somewhere else, you wouldn't be able to do. But what it does is it allows children around the world to reach out to their ancestral languages, to their home languages, to languages that just interest them for whatever reason. My daughter asked me just a couple of weeks ago, "Dad, can we learn Korean together?" And when I asked her why, the answer was, because I really like this YouTube channel talking about interior design and it happens to be in Korean. I'm like, that's absolutely fantastic. Of course we can. And what I've set as a goal is in a year's time, we can go to Korea together and we can use the language we learn together and we can make this our project that we do as father and daughter. And these are the kinds of things that technology offers, but you can also have this in-person thing that you do, maybe as a treat, you travel, you can use it and just combine the two things together quite happily.
I think that's a wonderful answer and a wonderful thing you're doing with your daughter as well, and that I agree. I think that it's the technology enhances but doesn't replace the human connection and experience. So maybe just on that sort of theme, obviously we are at the moment, and probably for the next number of months, and certainly sort of with large scale international travel, probably going to be limited for some time. Can we still create meaningful international cultural experiences without the travel? What does the short term to medium future look like for us in that regard? Sylvia, sorry, I think you might be on mute, sorry.
Yes, I am. Well, thank you very much for that. Well, yes, I agree that COVID has restricted international travel, but at the same time, it has opened up incredible opportunities for internationalization and for getting to know others, things that were not possible before. And I put an example in my university. Next semester, we are going to have at least one session given by a foreigner or where students attend a class in another country, at least one session in each of the subjects that are given in our university. And that is something that we can do because people can jump into one of our classes from many parts of the world, and that really makes intercultural education thrive, I think. So I think that this is opening up an enormous possibility that wasn't there before, but that won't go away. After post-COVID, it's going to be there because we have discovered the possibility of technology and what technology allows us to do regarding internationalization. So I really think that this is something that we have to take a lot of advantage of.
Thank you, Sylvia. As I knew would happen when we started this conversation, time has, in the blink of an eye, raced past us, and I'm sure that everybody listening will agree. We could continue this conversation, I think, for some time yet, and there's been so many nuggets and really interesting perspectives that have come out in this. And I think what's been so exciting from this conversation is how forward-looking it is, how positive it's being, and I think it demonstrates the leadership that exists within the education and educators and those involved in promoting in languages and intercultural learning. If I could maybe just ask each of you in the final few moments we have, just to share perhaps your final thoughts, reflections on today's session. This has been very much about the future of education, intercultural, the role of intercultural learning and the role of language and international experiences. Perhaps you could just, if you all had a short takeaway from the conversation this afternoon, or the one nugget you'd like everybody to take home with them today, what would it be? Maybe just go back through starting with Sharon.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation to take part. What I'm taking away from all of this is that, this pandemic has caused chaos in many ways, but out of chaos, when it's managed properly, there is so much opportunity across technology, across cultures, bringing people together. So what I'm taking away is, let's see possibilities and not see problems.
Brilliant. Thank you for that upbeat final words. And then Janice, maybe I could come to you.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I'm obviously coming at this from a languages perspective, and I suppose the one thing that comes across for me is that intercultural learning and intercultural skills and language skills for me are inseparable, and that we need to address both sides of that and to bring them together and to show why they are connected, in terms of looking to the future.
Thank you so much, Janice, and thanks for your contributions today. Richard, if I can maybe come to you.
I've really enjoyed all of the conversation and the comments that I've heard today, and I've learnt a lot as well. And just to give you an example from this year, from my own conference. So I organised the Polyglot conference, and it's for people who love language wherever they are in the world. Normally we have a physical location, and we bring around 700 people together if it's in a European destination. Now, what this year did is it forced us to be in an online environment. So we rebranded it as global. Now, what that did was it enabled over 2,000 people to join us. And not only that, it allowed people who cannot otherwise travel. Many people from Iran, we got to mix with people from countries where they otherwise would not get to interact with all the other participants. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. And I wholeheartedly agree that what's happened from this year is something that not only we will take forward, but we definitely should take forward and mix with whatever we do in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Richard. And I hope you and your daughter have a great trip to Korea next year. Sylvia, a final thought from you. Sorry, just make sure you're off mute.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I started speaking out about this globalized world, and I think there are bad things coming from globalization, such as inequality, polarization, the degrading of our environment. But there are also a lot of good things that come out of globalization, such as, for example, the growing awareness of human rights, or the fact that we have a global agenda now, the 2030 agenda, that we should all be striving to achieve, the possibility of communication in real time with other cultures. And well, what we aspire is for a world where the good things prevail over the bad things. And I think that, for example, one of the things that we have to strive for is a planet that belongs to us all, and which humanity as a whole should care for. And education, intercultural education, is at the center of this. We have to deepen our understanding of how to translate its principles into educational practices. I don't think we know enough yet. We have to really deepen our understanding of how to do it and have experiences and explore them and share them. And of course, here teachers are key. So I think one of our main aims is to work with teachers and to train them in intercultural approach to education. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and a wonderful global perspective to finish with. Look, I can't thank enough our really amazing and distinguished panelists for sharing their thoughts. And as I say, I am buzzing with ideas and enriched by the conversation. So thank you so much to each of you, and thank you to everybody who's joined the call today, and for some of the really great questions. And if I didn't get them, I hope that they were answered. There was a couple I think were probably answered in the course of the event, and we hope that you've enjoyed it, and we hope that you will also carry on the conversation on social media. So if please remember to use the hashtag, and perhaps if you want, you can do your video with your own vision, your own ambition. I mean, I think the bar has been set very high by our panelists this afternoon, but please feel free to put that video on with the hashtag Schools Think Next, and you will see on your screen that the next Schools Think Next online conversation is at the same time on Wednesday the 27th of January in 2021, and registration will open soon on the British Council Northern Ireland website. The theme of that will be shared society. So again, I know we're going to have it'll be a fascinating and interesting conversation, and particularly being hosted and coming from a place of the world where we are still very much learning how to be and become a shared society. In the next day or so, you'll receive an email with a link to the feedback form, and the British Council would really appreciate your views to inform their planning for future events. I suppose just really today, for me, the intercultural learning and the embedding of language and learning of languages, for me, seems to be an essential solution for how we resolve a lot of the issues that we face both locally and indeed internationally. So I think this is a conversation that will continue, and I thank all of you for being pioneers in that conversation, and for reminding us of the importance of dialogue, conversations, and of course building relationships. And building relationships is something that has underpinned a lot of my work, a lot of what I do, and a lot of the messaging I have. And when I was at One Young World in Bogota in Colombia, I had the privilege of being introduced by the then President Santos and the late Kofi Annan onto stage. And the theme of my speech was, it's all about relationships. It's all about understanding each other. So it seems to me that Generation Z, that young people are critical to leading that change. And I'm really excited to share with the panel and the delegates that One Young World will be coming to Belfast in 2023. So I think an opportunity, I hope locally, to really embed that celebration of global ambition and intercultural learning. And I know the Education Authority, Sharon, will be in touch, because there's a whole plans around that year of a year of youth. So the theme of One Young World Belfast will be Resilient City, Global Ambition, which I think sums up the theme very much of today's conversation as well. So I can't thank you enough. I thank the British Council for putting this event on and for asking me to host. And we thank everybody again for taking the time to join us. So wherever you're on the world, please have a great day or evening, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next event. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed sharing with all of you.
Thank you.
Bye to our audience.